Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name's Bennett Barclay. I write science fiction and fantasy, and on this channel I talk about all things science fiction, fantasy, or writing related. It'll probably come as no shock that the guy who now writes fantasy read a lot of it when he was a kid. Even as a young reader, I was reading a bunch of different fantasy series. Some of these books stuck with me more than others, and I want to catalog my personal top 5 favorite middle grade and YA fantasy series. Now, I think it's important to note that I'm not trying to make any kind of objective list by any means, and I'm not ranking these based on quality necessarily. These are just my personal favorites and the books that were most influential on me as I grew and developed as a writer. If you see a placement here that you disagree with, or if you think I'm missing something that should be on the list, please, by all means, let me know down in the comments below. I would really love to hear from you guys. So, without any further ado, let's get into the list. Number 5, Harry Potter. I know I'm probably already pissing people off by putting Harry Potter at the bottom of my list. Don't get me wrong, Harry Potter is an excellent series, and I have a lot of good memories about these books. The movies, not so much. The movies I have questionable opinions on, but I did enjoy the books, and I remember reading them over and over again as a kid in the build up to the release of book 7. Harry Potter was really my first introduction to a multi-book epic fantasy series. And I would argue that despite maybe its narrow scope, Harry Potter is at its core epic fantasy. The stakes are massive and world altering, and the characters have important roles to play that are really beyond them. I appreciate Harry Potter for being the portal into fantasy for millions of kids, including myself. Now, why is it on the bottom of my list? The only reason it's here is because after book 7 came out and I read the entirety of book 7 in a single day, I've never felt any desire to go back to Harry Potter. Now, what that says about the series versus what that says about me, I don't know. That's a whole other topic. But I remember it very fondly. And there's no denying that it's been influential on me as a writer. But for me, Harry Potter is something I've never had any desire to revisit. But that doesn't diminish its greatness and its importance, and it really deserves its spot on this list. Number 4, Ranger's Apprentice. Ranger's Apprentice is a middle grade fantasy that revolves around a group of clandestine wilderness warriors slash spies in a pastiche of medieval England, surrounded on one side by a pastiche of Scotland and on the other side a pastiche of ancient Celtland. Ranger's Apprentice is perhaps not the most fleshed out world that has ever been constructed for middle grade fantasy, but it had really interesting characters and it had very compelling plots. Ranger's Apprentice was something that I really identified with. I identified with the main character of that series, and that was really important as a kid who was trying to find his place in a world that didn't quite match up with anything he expected. The Ranger's Apprentice books are also beautifully written. John Flanagan has an excellent grasp of prose, and it was very well done without being unapproachable to a middle grade reader, and the series deserves its place on this list. Also, I'm pretty sure that the D&D Ranger is my favorite class in the game purely because of Ranger's Apprentice, even if the 5th edition version is somewhat questionable. Number 3, The Inheritance Cycle. Back in the day, it used to be very fashionable to hate on Aragon and the entire inheritance cycle. This series was decried as a ripoff and being overly derivative and just being a cash grab. Christopher Paolini was labeled as essentially a hack. And I see where some of the valid criticisms come from. The series does mirror plenty of other stories that have come before it, sometimes as direct parallels. However, for myself and for a lot of other kids in the same age range, Aragon was an introduction to secondary world epic fantasy like we had never seen before, and it was something that was uniquely ours. The fact that all the older people were hating on this series kind of made it even better. It was something that they didn't want us to read. It was something that we were decried for liking. And for a lot of people, it was something that we enjoyed secretly. Now, however, fortunately, the public opinion on this series seems to have come around a fair bit. There's a lot of nostalgia for Aragon. Christopher Paolini seems like he's a really stand-up guy and a really good writer now. I was thrilled to see his announcement about a fifth book in the Inheritance Cycle world, and I'm honestly really excited for it. Murtagh was one of my favorite characters in the original series, and I'm definitely picking that up later in the year when it comes out. So this is why the Inheritance Cycle is number 3 on this list. Number 2, Pendragon. This is honestly a series I'm amazed I don't see more buzz about. Pendragon was somewhat unique. It was a middle grade / YA science fiction fantasy adventure / epic fantasy story. Basically, if you crossed Doctor Who with Indiana Jones and The Matrix, that's what Pendragon was. Pendragon is a story about Bobby Drake, a normal kid in late 90s, early 2000s middle-class America, who is taken by his uncle away from his normal, familiar, comfortable life and is cast down the road to adventure throughout time and space. Bobby becomes involved in a conflict where the stakes are everything that ever was, ever has been, ever will be. Bobby's actions determine the fate of not just the material world, but the immaterial world. Pendragon was unique in the middle grade space. I've never seen any other series in the middle grade area or even low-level YA area that features stakes this immense. It was deeply complicated. There were moral questions, moral quandaries, and Bobby became a deeply flawed protagonist. His well-intentioned actions often resulted in a lot of pain and suffering, especially as the series progressed further. The Wheel of Time is one of my favorite series, and Pendragon kind of served as a primer for that with its massive 10-book arc. And I really am honestly surprised that I don't see more people talking about this series. How is it received online? If you've ever had any experience with it, if you have any encounters with its fandom, let me know in the comments below. I would be really curious to hear about it. But in any event, Pendragon is still one of my favorite series of all time, and it deserves its place on this list. Number 1, Artemis Fowl. All right, now we're getting to the big leagues. When I was a kid and everybody else was adoring Harry Potter, which I've already said I really liked, I was gushing over Artemis Fowl. Artemis Fowl is a series about a 12-year-old criminal mastermind who inherits his family's dying crime syndicate and is determined to bring it back to glory. Artemis Fowl was my introduction as a young reader to morally gray characters. In the first book in particular, Artemis is not a hero. He is straight up the villain of the piece. Even though he's your protagonist, even though you're rooting for him and you want to see him succeed because he's deeply compelling and you understand why he's doing what he's doing. This kid does some really horrible things. He commits kidnapping, he commits extortion, he holds a woman hostage throughout the entirety of the first book. He threatens to reveal a secret and vulnerable society to a wider world that would immediately exploit them for its own benefit. He is a deplorable human being throughout the entirety of the first book, but you're in his head so much that you understand why he's taking the actions he's taking. You understand the pride that fills Artemis, the ambition that drives him, and the need for a whole family that underlies everything he's doing in this book. Every action he takes in this book is geared towards rebuilding his fractured and separated family. Artemis was also my introduction to lengthy and sweeping character arcs throughout the course of a series. Where Artemis starts at this series is not where he finishes the series. Artemis has a moral shift over the course of the books. Where Artemis begins as a monster, he ends as a hero, and it feels natural and organic, and like it rises from the real nature of the character. It does not feel forced in any way, and to this day, he remains one of my favorite characters of all time. I haven't gone back to Artemis in a long time, but I'd like to revisit these books and see how they hold up after all these years. I also know that Disney released a movie based on these books in, I want to say, 2020. I have not seen it. I watched the very first trailer for it and thought it was what's the best way to describe it? Hot garbage. This movie looks terrible, and it was clearly made by somebody who did not understand what the point of Artemis Fowl actually was. But anyway, guys, that's my list of my 5 most influential and favorite YA and middle grade fantasy series. What did you think? Did you have any comments or questions? Did you have anything that you think should be on the list? Let me know down in the comments below, and until next time, I will see you guys later. Bye-bye.